Your Creative Push, episode 150.
Is this thing that one wants to do, is it fun? Because if it stops feeling like play, then it's probably not worth doing.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and today's episode is part 1 of my conversation with Martin Wittfooth. Martin is an awesome, talented fine artist from New York City that does these amazing, surreal oil paintings, mostly of animals, that are absolutely insane. And he's a super intelligent and thoughtful guy, so naturally the conversation went on for longer than usual, so this is a kind of bonus 2-part series. Today's episode will be the first part, and then you get the rest of it on Saturday, tomorrow. So you get a little weekend episode for y'all. But I already loved Martin before we started talking, and then talking with him. I just really dug his vibe. I love what he stands for. I love what his art stands for. I love the way he thinks about the world. I love the way he thinks about human existence and kind of our place in it. And we really get into that, especially in part 2. But I don't want to talk about it too much before it actually happens. So here you go, part 1 of my conversation with Martin. Enjoy. Martin, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I was wondering, because I don't think I'll be able to do it justice, would you be able to describe your artwork for everyone?
Yeah, I would probably describe it as, they're allegorical paintings in that there's a lot of symbolism and stuff that I'm using, that some of it pulls from certain kind of archetypes, like historical archetypes, and just otherwise just ways by which symbolism has been kind of used universally. But generally I tend to go for sort of like a personal vocabulary when it comes to symbolism. But it tends to my work tends to want to point to contemporary issues or things that I'm thinking about as far as it relates to the time that I'm living in. So in a weird way, like I've kind of described to some people that a lot of my work on some weird level are kind of self-portraits in a way. People see various things within the work, not least of which, of course, is sort of like an environmental angle, because a lot of my work does have to do with that. But generally, when I paint them, I tend to think of them as some kind of emotive response that I'm having to things that trouble me about, just the time and the species in which I exist. Just with that in mind, though, I feel like the artwork that I make, I just want it to be some kind of at least personal commentary to things that I don't have another platform necessarily to speak from. It's a way for me to process stuff that I want to have a dialogue with people about, but it's just coming through the painting medium, at least for the moment. But yeah, I at the same time as me saying that, though, I do hope that my work, whenever people discover it, whenever people are looking at it, that they end up having their own personal reading of it. So I don't want to necessarily be too explicit about what the work is about. I'd rather that be something that either on an emotional level or just conceptually, anyone looking at it would have their own response or own dialogue with it. But at least my motive for making it is to allegorize to some degree my time in the place. Well, I suppose the other way around, like my place, my existence within the particular time that I'm living in.
No, I think that's like the reason art exists, and kind of, I don't know, like the job of artists and creative people is to kind of put a timestamp on who you think that you are in the world, and how the world kind of acts around you, and like your take on it. And I think that you do that perfectly. And you're right. I think the other awesome thing about art is that while it may mean something to you, and if you're able to really get personal about it and just go from the heart, that other people will relate to it, not necessarily in the way that you intended for yourself, right. But they can make their own kind of story for it. I think that's what's so important.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, like, you do some pretty wild things too. Like, did it take you a while to get the kind of courage to, I don't know, like have a hand come out of an elephant, like, and things like that? Was that kind of always your style, or did it kind of develop into that?
It developed into that over time. I mean, I feel like when I look at, just recently I did a lecture in Massachusetts where, I was encouraged to dig up really old work because I was speaking to aspiring artists, like aspiring illustration class. So I was encouraged to dig up like really, really old work. To say the least, it was a bit painful because I haven't looked at that stuff in so long. But it was funny looking at it because I realized that those early pieces, and by early pieces, I mean, something like 15 years ago, like in college, they had sort of the seed of what then has become what I'm doing now. So in a way, I feel like for a little while there with my paintings, I was early on, I was trying to figure out, speaking about similar things, though I feel like very much more obvious in the sense of like sort of the messages behind them. But I was trying to use the human figure. I was doing these stylized kind of human figures to get that idea across, but they fell sort of short of what I eventually would want to do, which is to get more to a kind of intuitive kind of symbolic vocabulary with my work. My work has had to go through a bunch of sort of these subtle changes if you look at a long enough timeline, but definitely from where it was at, as I said, again, like 15 years ago to now, it's almost unrecognizable. But having made them, I can kind of see this gradual process by which it's become what it is today. But I kind of want to, I hope that I'll have the same kind of reaction in, say, another 15 years looking back. I'm sure I'll be happy with what I've been doing in the last little while, but I want to look back and say, hey, look how much I've changed the work again, but not by these immediate leaps and bounds. I'd like for it to be this kind of fluid, flowy process where it's consistently kind of merging towards something else. Because I think that's just the way organically I like to see at least my own artwork develop.
Yeah, and I think as a creative person, that's how you are able to tell that you're progressing. It's like kind of like putting your head down, doing the work every single day, and then, looking back, 5, 10, 15 years later, and then seeing the progress. And
yeah,
if you don't see a change, you're probably not doing it right. You're probably not progressing and developing your voice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's really cool. Well, speaking of old work, I was wondering, could you take us back to like one of your first creative moments and maybe tell us that story?
This is super far back, but I remember my artwork, if we can even call it that, but like generally you think of like kids' drawings all having like you'd think of like the stick man / stick woman, maybe stick dog. There's a field, there's a house.
Don't forget the sun.
A sun, and the sun is the flower and whatever. But like, for whatever reason, that seems to be like the quintessential archetypal kids drawing, right? Mm-hmm. I was definitely doing those as well, but then I have this pretty clear memory of at one point, for whatever reason, drawing something that was far less predictable, like something I hadn't seen before. Like I think it was just starting to sort of exercise my imagination a little bit more. It wasn't kindergarten, but perhaps like first grade or something. And I remember it being the first time when, rather than me just sitting there puttering around and like drawing something and getting sort of this sort of like customary response from whoever was seeing, like the customary response in that case being like, oh, this is so cute or whatever, because I'm just drawing. But I remember there being this moment when I can't remember who it was, but it was an adult figure in my life seeing the work and kind of realizing like this isn't bad. You know what I mean? Like that I had some makings of art. Well, basically my teaching, when I remember what I remember realizing was that my artwork could get a response out of people, right? And whatever it was, I can't remember what the subject matter was, though I seem to recall it could have been like me drawing some kind of like ghost house or something. But there was this interesting kind of switch where it went from just making artwork without any kind of dialogue with anybody else, and then all of a sudden making some piece of artwork where something sparked, like there was a response that wasn't just predicted. I don't know if that whole rant makes a whole lot of sense, but it was just noticing all of a sudden that like through drawing, all of a sudden people took interest in what I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's a lot of interesting things in there. I think one of the things is like using your imagination. I think a lot of people don't, myself included. It took me a while, like as a writer, to go from nonfiction to fiction, to be able to kind of conjure up some thing that's never happened to me, that is purely from my imagination, as opposed to writing about my life, writing about my day. And I think that there's a switch that happens, and for some people it happens early, like for you, where you're able to just do that. And I think it's something that can be really inspiring once you find you're like, oh, I can actually do whatever I want. Yeah. I don't have to pull from my own life. And I think maybe that also reflects in your art now, like you're talking about how, these are in a way self-portraits, and it's really interesting to me that you say that, because they're not actual pictures of you.
Right. Yeah. It's in a way, it's to think of them almost as like emotional self-portraits, if that makes any sense. Like trying to trap the inner realm onto some kind of external object, because I'm trying to get myself somehow trapped onto the canvases, but in a way that isn't the predictable image of me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And also going along with your story too is that kind of realization that art can make people talk. You talk with you or talk with each other. It's a form of communication without actually speaking. And when you can get that affirmation like you did when you were a kid, that's really awesome.
Yeah, and I think there's something super interesting when one kind of realizes that fact that we belong to a species that is very preoccupied with sharing with others, like communicating something to each other, like leaving messages for each other to be picked up in the future. There's something really, really strange and kind of just profound about that. I think that we have this kind of habit, like very, very many of us, I have this habit of wanting to really dialogue with one another, and often not by the most conventional means.
What do you mean by conventional means?
Well, just, like conventional means just speaking something mundane, such as something pragmatic, like what do you want to eat for dinner or whatever. It's more like, the idea that we want to speak with each other, even on the level of a kind of emotional dialogue, like that. I even think of something as music of course, it's a form of communication, but there's a desire behind the musician, I think, to share audibly with other people a kind of emotional landscape. Doesn't it maybe apply to all music, doesn't maybe apply to everyone's motive for making it, but I feel like generally when I think of music that we connect with, there's some kind of an emotional dialogue that we can have with a piece of music, for instance. Speaking more to just like the motive of wanting to, there's some kind of base desire, I think, within us to just share with one another. That's what I find to be really, really kind of comforting, because sometimes when you think of the world in its darker forms, you can think of it as being kind of dog eat dog. But I think at the end of the day, there's so much resistance to that idea via just the simple act of how much art in all its myriad forms is being produced, that people are putting out there for other people to enjoy,
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, like you said, the species that we are, and that we've kind of the world that we find ourselves in, there's a lot of just base sharing. There's just, posting what you eat for dinner on Facebook, or,
right.
Just posting like what you thought about the game.
Yeah,
But when you can get to this place where you can go so much deeper with art or with music or with writing or whatever it is, where you can really get to that emotionality, I think that's kind of our intention as a species. And when you can tap into that, when you haven't tapped into it, like since you were a kid, like when you have this full-time job that's just eating away at you, and you are only making these like basic sharings with other people, when you can actually get to express yourself and what you truly feel about the world and the time that you live in through art, I think that is just something that's just magical, and it's something that you kind of need to cling on to, and I think it's the best way to, and really the only way to fully be able to communicate and to share.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about resistance, but are there any things that held you back since that time when you were a kid starting to draw, and maybe that exists still today for you to get the work done?
Oh yeah, plenty of stuff. I mean, earlier on, of course, it was just trying to figure out practically like how the hell I could pursue the art thing without necessarily being starving while doing it, you know? So I started out, like my schooling when I went to do college. I went to, I grew up in Finland, but then we moved over to Canada when I was like 12 or 13, I think. So then by the time I started thinking about like what to do after high school, illustration was where I went because I think there was one teacher I had in high school who knew a bit about at least like the art market, like not just art for the sake of having a hobby, but like how to actually do something with it. Mm-hmm. So he suggested I pursue illustration, but so I went into illustration with the intent of just trying to figure out, first of all, generally, like how can I make art in the first place, but also how can I make art into a career? Because that's something I feel is pretty sort of mangled about the Western system, applying pretty broadly across the globe. But it's this idea that at a pretty early age we have to have the rest of our lives figured out really quickly at an age when I don't think anyone is in a right place from experience to be able to make that kind of call. And some people land on something that they do actually really end up enjoying. But thankfully, I have to say I'm really, really lucky in that. Like I somehow always knew I wanted to do art. And then from high school, I did go off to pursue it, though frankly, I didn't know what I was doing. It's just that I knew I wanted to do it. So a lot of like the resistance I faced throughout the whole process from early on all the way up until now, of course, has been trying to just figure out like how do I marry this strange kind of intuitive practice of painting with the financial need one has in living in a society. So first of all, like how do I make stuff that people want enough to want to give me money for it, but at the same time to keep the work pure in the sense of I'm not, I've learned a while ago, and there's an ethos I want to stick to, which is I do want to make my artwork with no sort of set audience in mind, because otherwise I feel like it'll pollute it it'll pollute the work to some degree for me if I'm just painting for some phantom audience. It really, from the beginning to the end, like a painting does need to sort of feel like an honest transmission for me. But then with that in mind, it's like I had to figure out along the way, how do I make artwork that does feel very personal, that I'm making it from a very sort of like true and honest personal place, but have it connect with people enough that they would want to support it financially so I could do it full time, for instance, which thankfully is my reality. But there were a lot of kind of things I had to figure out along the way, not least of which was how to paint and all that, but also how to align myself with galleries and dealers who understood the work and could kind of get it in front of the right collectors and whatnot. So those are all kind of customary things. I'm sure most, if not all, artists deal with that to some degree. But yeah, I can't say beyond that there were necessarily sort of like specific bits of resistance. I had a very supportive family too. Like they really, once I set my mind to pursue painting, they were really super supportive about it, and they have been the whole way through. So the resistance I have gotten has just been largely just trying to figure out how this business works in the first place. And it's always such a gray area because there really isn't a clear answer to the art market, or even decisions such as, how many paintings should I do for a show and how large should they be and all that kind of stuff. Like I've just stuck to kind of this principle that I'll just do the work if it feels right to do it. And I'll do it at whatever scale it needs to be, and I'll take as long a time as I need to for that. But at the same time, you run up against deadlines and all this other sort of pragmatic stuff that it's unavoidable during the process. And, you learn along the way, but it's one thing that I've recently started learning to do, which, I have the luxury of doing now, is just slowing down a bit. Like I just feel like the resistance I'm running into nowadays is just kind of not having enough time at my disposal. And I'm going to be able to do it after this next show, but just easing up on the volume of work I feel like I have to do, and let the kind of inspiration mining process take a bit of precedence over necessarily just painting all the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to just your initial kind of resistance of starting it out and finding a way to do it. I think that a lot of people listening have maybe gone down that path where they go to school and they kind of spin the big wheel. Like you said, they're not really equipped to make that big call about what they're going to do for the rest of their life. And I think that is one of the fucked up things about what the Western world, that is just, it makes it so tough, because especially to do a kind of creative field, because you put so much money into college, into education, and then make this decision, and take courses based on this decision that you've made as a very, very, very young adult,
right.
Or not even quite an adult yet. And you have so many other things that you have to figure out about life. And suddenly you're supposed to make this career choice. And then there's so much pressure, especially from, parents or people that surround you that are like, well, that's not really the easiest life that you're going to create for yourself if you try to go for the art thing. So you're just pushed in this direction to do possibly something you don't want to, and you pour so much money into it, and then you most likely will have debts because of it for a long time. Yeah. And then there's just this pressure just to go down this path. And I think a lot of the people listening have gone down this path, and they're maybe trying to get back to their creative passions, because they've kind of push them down. Because like we were talking about before, it's like once you find that way to be able to express yourself, it's almost addicting, and it's like to think about it is to miss it, so it's like you push it down and you don't even want to try to get back to it. But I think, would you have any advice for somebody that has gone down that path, that finds themselves listening to this 5, 10, 20 years down a career path that they're not necessarily in love with, and they want to get back to their passion, and not necessarily to make a pivot to switch careers yet, but just to get back to that kind of initial joy that we were talking about before, where you find that way to communicate? Sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things to say to that. I guess one would be, first of all, just to kind of recognize that we live in an extremely strange and beautiful time right now, in that the transference of knowledge and the kind of the widespread potentiality of inspiration is at an all-time high. Like, I don't think there's ever been such an access to good or bad. I mean, I'll get to the this is the pro that I'll speak about first, and then I'll get to the
good news first.
But like, I would just say that, like, if one knows where to look, or at least knows not to be distracted by a million other things, and just kind of like zero in on something, like, one doesn't nowadays need to go to some super expensive college to learn from people who might have the knowledge to sort of push somebody in the direction of their interest or whatnot. Like, there is a lot that one can gain just by knowing where to look through the internet, and not only knowing where to look, but also knowing how to connect with people, because that's another important part of it, is building community around oneself if you're pursuing something, because the greatest transference, I feel like, of both inspiration and of knowledge and criticism, because I think critiques are very important, is to garner a kind of group of like-minded friends who are willing to share, their things about their own craft, but also are open enough with one another to be able to speak about it openly. So I would just say that first of all, to recognize that, whatever one is doing, let's say, quote unquote, full time, doesn't need to be the entirety of what they're doing. Like, I don't think that, for instance, somebody pursuing or wanting to get back into painting, for instance, is not just to say that the only way one can be a painter is to do it 10 hours a day. Like, I think that, just getting back into it and looking at it as not as there's the book, the Bhagavad Gita, which is, this ancient Hindu text that has a very good line in it, where the line goes, "You have the right to your actions, but not the fruit of your actions." And I keep coming back to that, because I think that the process of making something, whatever it happens to be, I don't like to use the word should, but when I at least think of myself approaching my work, like, I should have that as my principle for myself, which is to say that I think just the act of painting, for instance, is why I'm painting. I'm not painting for for the end result, whatever that may be, because that's often an unknown future. So this is all to basically say that, like, you know, if one has a love for a certain thing that they want to do, whether it's music or sculpture, painting or writing or whatever it is, first of all, we have great access to wells of knowledge and whatnot for the kind of, to answer the how question, like, how do I make this? How do I learn an instrument? How do I whatever? Like, there's such great access to that kind of a thing now without having to go to some ivory tower to get it. And second of all, you know, I point well made here, I think, would be to not think of it as like, to have a love for something and wanting to do it equals that it has to now become your career right away. For instance, somebody starting to paint, it's one shouldn't expect to be at the level of their greatest inspirations right out of the gates, because it's not the way it happens. It's a slow and steady process. But just getting onto that path, I think, is something that one can very easily feel satisfied about. I mean, it's a very rewarding thing to have some kind of medium by which to express, or like that inner landscape that I was talking about before. And I think everybody has some inclination towards something. It's just that to feel bogged down by the hours spent doing something else. Sure, I mean, it takes a lot of time. It does take a lot of energy, but I think if somebody can just free up even a couple of hours in the evening or something, and to kind of trust this one main instinct, which is this thing that one wants to do, is it fun? Because if it stops feeling like play, then it's probably not worth doing. You know, it'll feel frustrating at times, but you know, I think things that do challenge a person, it's just that the rewards are that much greater afterwards. And at the end of the day, you know, like who has ever played a game, let's say even something as stupid as Monopoly, who has ever played like a silly board game with no stakes on the table? I think that having just a little bit of an element in there of whatever one gets into, like it does matter, but being able to pull back enough to say that at the same time, like, it's not the outcome that matters, it's the actual process of doing it.
So there you have it, part one of my conversation with Martin. Tomorrow we go deep. We talk a lot about his new show, and in doing so, we talk a lot about Terence McKenna and the Archaic Revival. If you are into Terence McKenna at all, if you're into that kind of psychedelic type of stuff, you should definitely tune in because it's super interesting to hear his take on all of that. But we also talk about how to get back to your creative origins, the reason you started in your creative endeavor, and also how to kind of continue with it, to continue to find surprises in your art, in your creative pursuit. But that is for you tomorrow, but hopefully today you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will see you tomorrow with the conclusion of my conversation with Martin Wittfooth. Thank you so much for listening. I love y'all, and we will see you then. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.